The dog caused chaos at the funeral by barking continuously at the coffin. When everyone found out why, they were left speechless. "What is that dog looking at?" someone murmured from the back of the church. The atmosphere at Rosa's funeral was heavy, almost as if the air was trapped within the church walls. The faces of those present reflected grief, loss, and the overcast sky seemed to share in their collective mourning. Rex, Rosa's loyal dog, was at the front, right at the foot of the coffin, when suddenly he broke the silence with a loud and desperate bark. "Calm down, Rex," a woman whispered, trying unsuccessfully to soothe him. But the dog wouldn't stop barking. His eyes were fixed on the coffin as if there was something only he could see or understand. At first, people tried to ignore it, thinking he was just distressed by the loss of his owner. But the louder Rex barked, the more uneasy everyone became. Murmurs began to spread among the attendees, with some exchanging wary glances, others clutching their rosaries in their hands, praying silently for the dog to calm down. But he didn't. On the contrary, his barking grew even more frantic. Father Charles, who was leading the ceremony, tried to regain control. "Brothers and sisters, we are here to say goodbye to our dear Rosa. Let's not allow something so trivial to distract us from this moment of reflection," he said with a forced smile. But even he avoided looking directly at the coffin. His eyes instead seemed lost on the floor, and a small bead of sweat trickled down his forehead. From the back of the church, Rodrigo, a man hardly known by anyone in town, watched everything in silence. Something didn't add up. He had come to the funeral out of sheer curiosity, having heard about Rosa's sudden death. Even though he didn't know her well, he felt a strange affection for her. And now, seeing Rex's reaction and Father Charles's nervousness, he couldn't shake off a sense of discomfort. Rodrigo wasn't the type to just sit back and do nothing. He was always observant, curious, someone who needed answers. He slowly stood up from his seat and walked to the front, his footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor of the church. The eyes of those present followed him with intrigue and surprise. No one understood why this man was approaching the dog, much less why he seemed so determined. "Rex," Rodrigo whispered as he knelt down beside the dog, gently stroking his head. For a moment, the barking stopped. The dog, as if recognizing Rodrigo as some kind of ally, wagged his tail slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on the coffin. Rodrigo looked towards where Rex was staring, and a chill ran down his spine. What was the dog trying to tell him? "Father Charles," Rodrigo's voice echoed firmly in the church. "How exactly did Rosa die?" A restless murmur filled the room. The question was direct, uncomfortable, and more than a few people shifted uneasily in their seats. Father Charles, who until that moment had tried to maintain his composure, seemed rattled by Rodrigo's words. "Rosa? She died peacefully, in her bed," the priest responded, but his voice trembled slightly. "I was the one who found her." "And why was she alone?" Rodrigo continued, not taking his eyes off the priest. "Why were you the first to find her?" Father Charles's face flushed, and for a moment he looked like he was going to lose his composure. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "This is neither the time nor the place for these questions, brother," he said, his tone now sharper. "We are here to bid her farewell, not to question her death." But Rodrigo didn't back down. Something in the priest's reaction confirmed his suspicions. Rex let out a low growl, as if sensing the tension in the room. "What if there's something we don't know?" Rodrigo stepped forward. "Maybe Rex is trying to tell us something you, Father Charles, don't want us to discover." The atmosphere in the church grew thick, as if everyone was holding their breath. Father Charles, now visibly nervous, wiped his forehead, trying to divert attention. "This is disrespectful," he said firmly. "Get that dog out of here. We will not allow this funeral to be ruined by meaningless superstitions." Some of the attendees nodded, but others began exchanging glances. The eyes of the children, which had once been looking at the coffin with fear, now watched Rodrigo with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Something in his words struck a chord. And Rex, the dog everyone knew as Rosa's loyal companion, stayed there, unmoved, staring at the coffin as if he knew a truth no one else could see. Rodrigo didn't say anything else. He knew any further words would be dismissed by most, but deep down, he felt like he was getting closer to the truth. However, to uncover what was really going on, he would need more than a dog's intuition. He needed proof. When the ceremony ended and the attendees began to leave, Rodrigo decided not to go. He stayed, watching the church, his mind racing, connecting details he had noticed from the moment he stepped inside. Rex sat by his side, his tail wagging slowly, as if waiting for the next move. "Stay calm, buddy," Rodrigo murmured, patting the dog's head. "We're going to find out what's wrong here." Rodrigo stood up slowly, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Rex followed closely, his tail wagging nervously but without barking. Together, they left the church and headed toward Rosa's house. As they walked through the cobbled streets of the town, Rodrigo tried to sort out his thoughts. Father Charles's words echoed in his head, but there was something about his tone, about the way he avoided certain looks that disturbed him. "Why you, Charles?" he murmured to himself. "Why were you the first to find her?" Rosa's house wasn't far. It was an old stone building, surrounded by trees that had lost some of their leaves as the cold weather set in. As they approached, Rodrigo noticed the front door was slightly ajar. His heart skipped a beat. The house was supposed to be locked up. Rosa had no close family who would have left it like that. "Stay close, Rex," he whispered as he carefully pushed the door open. The creak it made was almost deafening in the night's silence. The inside of the house was simple, modest. There was an unlit fireplace and some old furniture covered in dust. The small windows let in just enough light for Rodrigo to see that everything was in its place, or at least seemed to be. Still, he felt an unease wash over him. "Let's see what we can find," he said quietly, more to himself than to Rex. The dog sniffed the floor, moving slowly around the living room as if he was searching for something, too. Rodrigo walked over to a wooden table in the corner. On it, there were several scattered papers, and among them, he found something that caught his eye. A half-open letter with Rosa's name written in an unfamiliar handwriting. "What's this?" he wondered as he picked up the letter. As he opened it and read, the message was clear. Rosa had been looking into something related to the church, something she had discovered and didn't like. The words in the letter spoke of secret meetings, missing money, and a name that kept coming up: Charles. Rodrigo felt a knot form in his stomach. Everything was starting to make sense. Rosa had been close to uncovering something someone didn't want out in the open. But who else was involved? He continued sifting through the papers on the table until he found a small bronze keychain. The key hanging from it was old, with intricate details that suggested it was meant to open something important. Rodrigo knew this wasn't just any key. It was the clue he needed to move forward. "What do you think, Rex?" he asked, showing the key to the dog. Rex sniffed the keychain and then lifted his head, directing his gaze towards the door leading to the basement. Rodrigo felt a chill run down his spine. He knew he had to go down there, but he also sensed that what he might find could change everything. With a sigh, he decided to press on. He opened the basement door, and a cold, damp breeze hit his face. The wooden steps creaked under his feet as he descended, with Rex right behind him. The basement was dark, barely illuminated by the light coming from the door. Rodrigo switched on a flashlight he had brought and began to explore the space. It was a small area, filled with old boxes and furniture covered with dusty sheets. At the far end, there was an old metal trunk. Rodrigo walked over to the trunk and noticed it had a lock that matched the key he had found. With trembling hands, he inserted the key and turned it. The click of the lock echoed in the silence, and Rodrigo slowly lifted the lid. Inside the trunk, he found a series of old documents all related to the church. But what caught his attention the most was an envelope that contained a list of names and amounts of money. Each name was linked to a donation made to the church, but the figures didn't match what was publicly known. It was clear someone had been diverting those funds. Rodrigo took the documents and stuffed them inside his coat. Now he had proof. Now he understood why Rosa had been silenced. "We need to get to the church," he said, looking at Rex, who was already pacing nervously near the basement exit. As Rodrigo and Rex left the house, the air felt colder, heavier. He knew that what he had uncovered was just the beginning of something much bigger. He needed to confront Father Charles, and he would do it with the evidence in hand. Rodrigo walked through the cobblestone streets of the town, feeling the weight of every step. The cold air stung his cheeks, but he barely noticed it. In his mind, his thoughts were spinning rapidly. He had the proof, sure, but he also knew this was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The envelope with the documents carefully tucked inside his coat felt like it was burning against his chest, as if the truth it held was too hot to handle. Rex, always by his side, walked with a tense body. His ears perked up, as if he could sense the gravity of the situation. Rodrigo couldn't help but look at the dog with a mix of admiration and gratitude. Without him, he might never have found what Rosa had hidden. He might never have uncovered the secrets that Father Charles was trying to keep buried. The church loomed in front of them, dark and imposing in the distance. The candlelight inside cast eerie shadows through the windows, creating the sense that something hidden and ancient resided in that place. Rodrigo stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath. He knew what was coming wouldn't be easy. "Come on, Rex," he whispered, giving the dog a pat on the head. "It's time to face the truth." The church door was slightly open, as if it had been waiting for them. Rodrigo gently pushed it and stepped inside, with Rex right by his side. The silence inside was oppressive, broken only by the faint whisper of the wind slipping through the cracks in the windows. The candles flickered on the altar, and the shadows seemed to move as if they had a life of their own. "Father Charles!" Rodrigo called out, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "We know you're here." There was a moment of silence before soft footsteps could be heard coming from the sacristy. The priest slowly appeared, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression calm, but his eyes betrayed the nervousness he was trying to hide. "Rodrigo," he said with a strained smile, "what brings you here at this hour? It's not a time for prayers." "I think you know very well, Father," Rodrigo replied, stepping forward with Rex still by his side. "Rosa found out something before she died, something you didn't want anyone to know." Charles's eyes darkened for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about, my son. Rosa died peacefully. I already told you that. She died, yes, but not peacefully. And you know it. Rodrigo reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope he had found at Rosa's house. Here's the proof. Letters, documents, everything she discovered about you and the church. She knew you were skimming money from the donations, and you, it seems, knew that too. The priest took a step back, his face going pale. That's not true, he stammered, but his voice was weak, lacking the firmness it once had. You shouldn't believe the words of a woman who was confused, Rodrigo. Rosa wasn't in her right mind in her last days. No, enough with the lies. Rodrigo's voice boomed through the church, echoing off the stone walls. Rex knew from the start, and now I do too. Rosa wasn't confused. You killed her because she had the truth, and now that truth is in my hands. Silence fell again, thick and tense. The priest wiped a hand across his forehead, trying to clear the sweat that was beginning to form. His eyes darted around frantically, searching for an escape, a way out of the situation he was now trapped in. Rodrigo stepped forward slowly, holding the envelope up high, like a declaration of guilt. This sacred place has become the stage for your crimes, but you won't be able to hide any more, Father Charles. The truth will come out, and with it your corruption. The priest took a step back, stumbling slightly against the edge of the altar. You don't understand. It's not what you think. I did it for the church. For the good of everyone, he muttered. But his words sounded hollow, empty. For the good of everyone? Rodrigo looked at him with disbelief. Stealing from the congregation? Killing Rosa to protect your scam? That's not protecting anyone. That's greed and selfishness. Suddenly, Father Charles let out a cry of desperation. You don't know anything. He lunged at Rodrigo, his trembling hands reaching out to snatch the envelope. But Rex, always alert, jumped in front of his owner, growling fiercely, his teeth bared in a silent threat. The priest froze, terrified by the dog's ferocity. Rex didn't back down, his body rigid and his eyes locked on Charles, protecting Rodrigo with a determination that left no room for argument. The silence that followed was heavy, as if the very air in the church had been trapped in a limbo of tension. Rodrigo didn't move, his eyes locked on Father Charles, who now seemed much smaller, shrinking under the threatening presence of Rex. The dog kept growling, his muscles tense, ready to attack if the priest tried anything else. Charles slowly backed away, his eyes darting from Rodrigo to Rex and back to Rodrigo, as if searching for an impossible way out. But Rodrigo knew there was no turning back. The lies and fear that had surrounded the priest for so long were about to crumble. Everything was about to come to light. Easy, Rex, Rodrigo murmured, reaching a hand out toward the dog without taking his eyes off Father Charles. We've got him. He won't do anything else. Rex stopped growling, but he kept his eyes on the priest. Charles, panting, slowly lowered the hands he had raised in a defensive gesture, his eyes still wide with fear. You can't do this to me, Rodrigo, Charles said, his voice broken, almost a whisper. You don't understand what's at stake here. It's not just about money. There are things bigger than you can imagine. Bigger than the life of an innocent woman, Rodrigo replied coldly, his words laced with restrained anger. Bigger than the betrayal of an entire town. The priest seemed to waver, desperately searching for something to say, something to save him from the tidal wave that was coming. But Rodrigo didn't give him time. With the key he had found at Rosa's house still in his hand, he walked toward the altar. I'm going to uncover everything, Father, Rodrigo said, his tone resolute. "And I'll do it with or without your help." Charles took a step forward, as if he wanted to stop him, but Rex let out a low, warning growl that made him freeze in place. The priest watched with trembling hands as Rodrigo approached the statue at the back of the church, the same one Rosa had mentioned in her letters. Rodrigo knew there was something more there, something the priest had been desperately trying to hide. He knelt in front of the statue, his eyes searching for any sign of a hidden compartment. As he felt along the cold stones at the base, he found what he was looking for, a small slot that fit the key perfectly. The click of the lock echoed in the emptiness of the church, and Rodrigo opened a small door that led to a dark, narrow passageway. He glanced at Rex, who was watching him intently. He knew that whatever he was about to find could change everything. "Let's go, buddy," he whispered, and they both began to descend the stone steps into the dimness below. The air grew colder and denser as they went down, the echo of their footsteps whispering eerily down the hallway. The flashlight Rodrigo carried cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, but even the faint light couldn't ease the sense of oppression that grew with every step. Finally, they reached a rusted metal door. Rodrigo took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what he was about to discover. He pushed the door, which creaked as it opened, and what he saw on the other side left him breathless. In the center of the room, chained to a chair, was Rosa. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken and full of pain, but she was alive. She could barely move, her body weak after what seemed like weeks of captivity. When she saw Rodrigo, her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Rosa," Rodrigo murmured, his heart pounding in his chest. He rushed to her, kneeling by her side as he tried to undo the chains holding her captive. "I found you. You're alive. Don't worry, we're getting you out of here." As he worked to free Rosa, a chilling voice broke the silence from the entrance to the passage. "You shouldn't have come here!" Rodrigo turned sharply. There, standing at the entrance, was Father Charles, his face twisted with rage. In his hands, he held an old wooden bar, and his eyes glowed with a mix of desperation and hate. "I knew you wouldn't stop," Charles said, his voice dripping with venom. "I knew you'd come looking for her. But I can't let everything I've built fall apart because of you." Before Rodrigo could react, Charles lunged at him, swinging the wooden bar furiously. Rodrigo barely had time to dodge the first blow, rolling on the floor as the bar crashed down with a loud thud. Rex, always alert, didn't wait any longer. With a fierce bark, he leapt at the priest, sinking his teeth into Charles's leg with all his strength. Charles screamed in pain, trying to shake the dog off, but Rex wouldn't let go. Rodrigo quickly got to his feet, his heart pounding as he rushed toward the priest, shoving him against the wall. Charles struggled to break free, but between Rex's teeth and Rodrigo's determination, he was trapped. "It's over, Charles," Rodrigo said, his voice firm. "The truth has come out." Charles, panting, let the wooden bar drop. His eyes were filled with fury, but also with defeat. He knew there was no escape. Rodrigo let go, knowing the fight was over. He turned to Rosa, who was looking at him with tears in her eyes. Rex, releasing the priest's leg, went over to her, gently sniffing as if he knew the nightmare was finally over. Rodrigo freed Rosa's chains with trembling hands and at last helped her to her feet. Though weak, she managed to stand, leaning on him. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. But in her eyes, Rodrigo saw more than gratitude. He saw hope. The air outside the church was thick with tension as Rodrigo, Rosa, and Rex emerged from the darkness of the passage. Despite the cold night, a crowd had gathered in front of the temple, drawn by the echoes of the fight that had seeped through the walls. The murmurs grew as people tried to figure out what was happening, but as soon as they saw Rosa, weak and leaning on Rodrigo, silence fell over the place. Faces of disbelief and shock stared at the group. No one dared to speak first, but everyone knew that something terrible had happened. Rodrigo took a deep breath. He knew this moment had arrived, the moment to tell the truth, to expose everything he had discovered about Father Charles and his corruption. While Rex stayed beside them, vigilant, Rosa, still trembling, gave his arm a gentle squeeze, as if giving him the courage he needed. "Listen, everyone," Rodrigo said loudly, his tone firm but full of emotion. "What you're about to hear is the truth, a truth that many of you won't want to accept, but it's necessary that you know it." The murmurs stopped completely. The crowd, their eyes fixed on him, waited in silence. "Rosa did not die peacefully," Rodrigo continued, his voice carrying across the square. "It was not an accident or a natural death as we were led to believe. She was imprisoned and kept captive in the basements of this church by the very person we all trusted, Father Charles." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Some shook their heads in disbelief while others nervously clasped their hands together. But before they could fully react, Rodrigo pulled the envelope from his coat, containing the proof. The letters from Rosa, the documents, and the altered accounts that showed the theft of donation money. Rosa discovered that Father Charles was stealing from all of us, diverting the donation money for his own benefit, Rodrigo explained, holding up the papers for everyone to see. When she tried to stop him, he made her disappear, hoping no one would ask too many questions. "That's a lie," a voice shouted from the back of the crowd. It was Charles, limping, his face twisted with hate and desperation. "Everything this man says is slander. Rosa was crazy. She didn't know what she was talking about." But the priest's words no longer carried the same weight. The crowd began to stir, some moving closer to Rodrigo to examine the papers, others casting looks of disgust at the priest. An older woman, her face lined with years of devotion and faith, stepped forward and spoke, her voice shaking with indignation. "How dare you, Charles? You've guided us in this church for decades, and now it turns out you yourself defiled this holy place." "That's not true," Charles insisted, his voice now weaker, less convincing. "I did everything for the good of the church, for the good of all of you. You don't understand what's at stake." "The only one who doesn't understand here is you," Rodrigo intervened, stepping forward. "There's nothing greater than the truth, and today that truth has been revealed." At that moment, a group of men from the town, led by the owner of the cantina, stepped forward toward Charles. "It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions," the man said, his voice firm but calm. "You can't escape this." Charles, cornered, tried to back away, but there was no escape. The men surrounded him, and though his initial resistance was violent, he didn't have the strength to fight. Finally, they took him by the arms and led him toward the local police station, while the crowd watched in silence. Rodrigo, his heart still racing with adrenaline, turned to Rosa, who looked at him with eyes full of exhaustion, but also relief. "It's over," he murmured, though he knew that, in reality, the long recovery for the town was just beginning. Neighbors approached Rosa, some with tears in their eyes, others still in shock. They gathered around her, hugging her, silently grateful that she was alive. Rex, for his part, stayed close to her, as if he knew that, until that moment, his work was still not done. That same night, the town did not sleep. The lights in the houses stayed on, and whispered conversations filled the air until dawn. Everyone was talking about what had happened, about the lies they had lived, and the dark secret that had corrupted the church for so long. The sun had barely started to peek over the horizon, casting its first timid rays over the town, when Rodrigo stepped out of Rosa's small house. The morning air was heavy with moisture and silence, as if the whole world was still processing the events of the previous night. Rodrigo walked slowly down the cobblestone streets, his thoughts still tangled in the chaos of what had happened, but knowing that this day would mark the beginning of something new. The town wasn't the same. It felt different, like a dark veil had been lifted from its foundations. As he walked, he saw half-open shutters and the tired faces of those who hadn't been able to sleep. The secrets revealed the night before weighed on everyone. "Good morning, Rodrigo," said a trembling voice to his right. It was Doña Inés, an older woman who had always had blind faith in Father Charles. Her face was marked by sadness and confusion. "Is everything you said last night true? I still can't believe someone like the Father." Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Rodrigo looked at her with a mix of compassion and firmness. "It is, Doña Inés. I'm so sorry. None of us wanted this to be true, but Rosa risked her life to make sure we knew what he was doing." The woman lowered her gaze, her trembling hands clutching her wool shawl. "I still can't believe all of this happened in our church, in our town," she whispered. Rodrigo nodded silently. He knew that same feeling of betrayal was in the hearts of all the townspeople. The town had been shaken to its core, and although the truth was now out in the open, the pain of the revelation still felt fresh. Rodrigo continued his walk toward the town square. There, right in the center, some neighbors had gathered in small groups, talking in hushed tones. In the distance, he could see the sheriff and several men from the town discussing what would happen with the church and Father Charles, who was now locked up, awaiting a decision from the church authorities. Rex trotted alongside Rodrigo, his presence calming. The dog had, without a doubt, been the silent hero of this whole story. Every time they passed by someone, a shy smile or a look of admiration was directed at the dog. The children who used to run around the square now looked at him with awe, and some even timidly approached to pet him. "He's a good dog, Rodrigo," said Don Matias, the town baker, coming over. "I've never seen an animal like him. I always knew animals can sense things. We can't." Rodrigo smiled, bending down to pet Rex's head. "Yeah, he always knew something was wrong. What we did together." Don Matias nodded and stood in silence for a moment, looking toward the church with a deep look of concern. "I don't know what's going to happen now, Rodrigo. The church, the town, everything feels broken." "I know," Rodrigo replied, standing up again. "But now that the truth has come out, we can start to heal. Rosa is alive. That's already a start." The murmurs among the neighbors grew louder as the day went on, but deep down, Rodrigo knew that this town, though wounded, had the strength to rise again. The wounds of betrayal were deep, but so was the sense of community that had kept these people together for so many years. Hours later, when Rodrigo returned to Rosa's house, he found her sitting in the small backyard, soaking up the sun. Though her body was still weak, her spirit seemed stronger. There was something in her gaze, in the way she held her cup of tea, that showed she was ready to face whatever came next. "How are you feeling?" Rodrigo asked, sitting down beside her. "Better," Rosa replied, with a tired but sincere smile. "Thanks to you, Rodrigo, and thanks to Rex." She looked at the dog, who was resting at her feet, as if he understood every word. I never thought I'd come out of that darkness. But here I am." Rodrigo nodded silently, thinking for a moment about everything they had been through together. "This town has a lot of healing to do, but I think with you here, we can make it." Rosa let out a long, calm sigh, looking up at the sky. "I've been thinking about that. I don't know how long it will take me to get my life back, but I know I won't be doing it alone. This town needs support, and so do I." "And you'll have it," said Rodrigo, looking into her eyes with determination. "I'm not planning on leaving. I'll stay here. I'll help you. And together, we'll help the town rebuild." Rosa smiled gratefully, her eyes shining with a renewed sense of hope. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Rodrigo. You saved me." "It wasn't just me," he replied, a slight smile on his face as he petted Rex's head. "It was this friend here who always knew which way to go." They both stayed quiet, letting the calm of the morning surround them. They knew the future wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, there was light at the end of the tunnel. As the days passed, conversations about what happened in the church became the town's daily routine. People kept trying to find answers, rebuild their faith, and regain lost trust. However, one thing was certain. The presence of Rosa, Rodrigo, and Rex was a constant reminder that the truth, no matter how painful, always prevails. The afternoon sun slowly set over the town, tinting the rooftops with a warm golden glow as Rodrigo and Rosa strolled down the cobblestone streets. Beside them, Rex trotted calmly, his tail wagging with each step. The shadows grew longer, and the cool air reminded them that even though the day was ending, life in the town carried on, perhaps with fewer certainties than before, but with renewed hope. Rodrigo watched the familiar faces of the townspeople, some nodding in respect as they passed. He knew everyone in town was still processing what had happened. Conversations about the church and Father Charles continued, and although the wound was deep, the community was slowly beginning to heal. "How are you feeling today?" Rodrigo asked Rosa without stopping. Rosa, with a faint smile, glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "Stronger, but it's still hard. Everything that happened, what we found out. Sometimes it feels like a bad dream." Rodrigo nodded, understanding the weight she carried. "The important thing is that you're not alone in this anymore, Rosa. The town is with you. And so am I." Rosa paused for a moment, looking around. The houses, the shops, the small park where the children played, everything seemed so normal, yet everything had changed. "Sometimes I wonder how I'll help make things the way they used to be," she said with a sigh. "Time will do that," Rodrigo replied with the wisdom of someone who has learned to live one day at a time. "And with Rex here," he added with a smile as he petted the dog's head, "everyone knows we're in good hands, or rather, good paws." Rosa chuckled softly, feeling the warmth of the joke ease her anxiety a bit. Rex, as if he understood, lifted his head proudly, his eyes shining under the golden light of the sunset. He too had sensed the changes in the town, but his loyalty and constant presence gave everyone a sense of security they desperately needed. As they continued walking, the last rays of the sun painted the sky a soft orange. The sound of neighbors chatting and the crunch of leaves under their feet accompanied them. Rosa felt grateful, not just for having survived, but for the people around her, for Rodrigo and for Rex, her constant protector. "Whatever comes," Rosa murmured, looking at the horizon, "we'll be ready." "Yes," Rodrigo responded with determination. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." And so, with Rex by their side and the truth as their guide, they walked toward the future, knowing that Although the path wouldn't be easy, they would never be alone. The story of Rodrigo, Rosa, and Rex is a deeply moving journey full of human lessons. Throughout this narrative, what stands out most is the connection between the characters, especially the bond between Rodrigo and Rex, which becomes the pillar upon which much of the plot is built. From the start, Rex is not just an ordinary dog. He is the silent guardian of the truth, the loyal companion who guides Rodrigo in moments of uncertainty. Through his barking at the funeral, Rex acts as a protector and, in a way, as the voice of what is hidden, revealing secrets that humans couldn't see at first glance. His unwavering loyalty and sharp instincts are crucial in uncovering the truth about what happened to Rosa and the corruption within the church. Rodrigo's journey is also marked by his bravery, but it is Rex who gives a deeper meaning to his struggle. Together, they face dangers, and the relationship between man and animal grows stronger every day. Rex becomes a symbol of hope and courage, not just for Rodrigo, but for the whole town. The most powerful lesson of the story is the value of loyalty and companionship between humans and animals. Rex shows that love and protection know no barriers, and that, sometimes, animals can perceive and understand much more than we think. Rex's presence in the lives of Rodrigo and Rosa teaches us that we are not alone in our struggles, and that often, the deepest bonds come from those who don't need words to express their love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and guide you in every step of your journey.